Hello, thank you so much for joining me. Today we have a special interview with my wonderful audiobook narrator. So please welcome Aaron Adams. So Aaron, please tell us a little bit about yourself and what have you been doing so far and how you got into audiobooks narration.
Sure, I'd be happy to. I've been a college professor here in the United States for 20 years, and periodically, in fact, regularly, I will get people who will tell me that I have a voice that sounds like it should be on the radio. And you hear that all the time, or I hear it regularly. And I like to say that, really I have a face that is made for radio. I don't know about the voice. But at any rate, it just occurred to me probably a little over a year ago that it might be fun to narrate audiobooks. I actually was a theater major when I was in college. I enjoyed doing productions and things like that, and I've done a little bit of theater off and on since then, nothing on a regular basis. And my students would always tell me that my voice sounded very engaging and everything. So I guess it was just about a year ago, maybe a little bit less than a year ago, I just started looking up online, how do you get into doing audiobook narration? Read some things about Audible and ACX, which is a division of Amazon that matches narrators with authors. And I did a couple of test runs here at my home, went out, bought a microphone and some of the recording equipment, and then just started narrating a few things to post online that I thought would be fun to narrate. Like the Night Before Christmas, The Telltale Heart, Casey at the Bat, a few different types of genres, and then started auditioning for a few audiobooks, and that was where I got matched up with you, and I guess you had heard one or more of my recordings and thought I might work out well for the book that you're doing, and so that's what's gotten me into it.
Yeah, wonderful. I have to say I was very lucky to find you because I was searching for narrators on ACX, and I found a few voices that I liked, but they weren't quite what I needed. And then when I stumbled upon your profile and I listened to the Telltale Heart by Edgar Allan Poe, the story, I was like, oh, this is it. Because it's very strange, because I probably told you in the email, but just for the audience who's listening, I read that story before writing my collection of short stories. So it was really a weird but like wonderful coincidence. So yeah, really.
That's a story I've enjoyed. That's a story I've enjoyed for many years, and it was kind of a fun one to narrate, just because of the character that was in there, and I kind of enjoy doing scary things. That's just kind of fun. And so actually that worked out really well to do whispers and other strange stories, because there were some scary things and there's some interesting things there. It was a collection of stories that I enjoyed reading, and even more I enjoyed performing them. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm glad you had a lovely experience recording that. And I was going to ask you, what story did you enjoy most narrating from the collection, and why?
I don't know if I could pick out just one. I enjoyed, there was one where I got to be a psycho woman in the dream. Then there was another one where I got to be a psycho man, tender as the rain. And so being a psycho woman and a psycho man was kind of fun. Then I enjoyed Procology, because it was scary all the way through. Okay, you had this werewolf type character. I kind of enjoyed doing that. And at the very end of it, I still, even though I read the whole thing, you're really still not sure what happened with that thing. And maybe you can tell me sometime, exactly what happened at the end. And then I thought in the Forest of Bluebells was kind of fun, because there was a man who had a superpower, like, he could draw and make his drawings come to real. And so that was just kind of one of these fun sort of things that you always imagine, well, what would you do if you had a power like something like that? So those were kind of fun to work through. Certainly for me, the challenging one was to do the one that had the woman with the Eastern European accent, because that was nothing I had ever done before. And so I had to listen to some of that stuff on YouTube and try to get it. I probably didn't do it.
No, I thought it was so strange, but no, it sounded just right. Because I think some people who try to do like Eastern European accents, they overdo it and they make the characters sound stupid, as if Eastern European are stupid or something like that, just because of the accent. I don't know. I think they have the impression they speak broken English, very, very, very broken English, which is not really the case. And I thought you nailed it. Like, it was just the right amount of accent and like not trying too hard. That's what I liked about your narration. And it's just like you have such an intuition. Like, I didn't have because when I found you, I gave you even for the audition, I put some details about, because there's 12 stories in the collection. 9 are narrated from the male point of view, and 3 are from a female point of view. So I gave a few details about what I wanted, which I had to think about, because during the writing, I didn't really think, oh, this has to be American or English accent specifically. But obviously for your narration, I had to give you those directions. So it was very interesting for me to learn from that. And just very different experience producing an audiobook than writing a book.
Well, I figured anybody who's listening to this knows, that it's a man who's narrating it, and but he's doing it from a woman's point of view. So the goal was not to try to sound like convince anybody that I'm a woman. I'm not going to convince anybody I'm a woman, and I shouldn't. It was just enough to be able to. What I wanted to do was let any of the listeners know that it was from a woman's point of view. That here was a man narrating from a woman's point of view, not a man trying to sound just like a woman. So I just tried to put enough of a touch on there so that people would realize that, and hopefully it came across to the listeners.
No, it came across. I don't know. I'm personally very happy, not just because obviously it's my book and it's my first audio book. I am genuinely really happy with how it came out. I had a lady, a Romanian lady. I gave her the audio sample to listen to the voice, and obviously she doesn't speak English. And she listened to it and she was like, "Oh, this sounds like a movie star." Like that.
Okay.
So she really, she said it was a pleasant voice, and other people as well. It was just by listening to the voice, even if they understood the language or not, it's just by the intonation in your voice. It was just like, oh, it makes me want to listen. So, yeah.
Well, good. I hope lots of people find it pleasant to listen to and enjoyable to listen to. And if you have an interesting story, or in this case, a series of interesting stories, and at least that the narrator's voice is not a turn off, then I think that will carry the listeners through. And I'm hopeful that they enjoy listening to it, and hopefully they'll tell all their friends and families about the enjoyable experience as well.
For me personally, I think my favorite story from the collection narrated by you was Stars and Snowflakes.
Oh, okay.
You have also kids and kids' voices, and you have like famous people mentioned, and you had to make those voices. Was that challenging to like make a Marilyn Monroe or a F. Scott Fitzgerald voice? And there was that creepy sound as well at the beginning, the yelling. I was like, oh my God, that sent shivers.
Well, it was very clear from your writing who it was that was speaking. So I didn't feel the need to try to look up what did Scott Fitzgerald sound like and so forth, but just to make it a little bit of a different voice. And I don't think there's that many of the listeners really would know here's exactly what Scott Fitzgerald sounded like as well. And of course, with Marilyn Monroe, it had to be a female voice, a little bit on the sexier side. than would otherwise be. But just, again, just enough so that the listeners would know that when you say, F. Scott Fitzgerald said, or Marilyn Monroe said, that, okay, this is that person who is speaking now. And changing it just a little bit from my regular voice. So that was fun to get to do that. It made it a little bit more of a performance than just a straight narration, which made it kind of fun for me.
Sorry about that. I had the alarm set for like 3 o'clock because I thought we were meant to start talking at half 3. Sorry about that.
Not a problem at all.
So what other books have you narrated? I know you did like a non-fiction book before you started working on mine.
Right. Well, like I said, I just got started on this, I think March of this year. So I've been doing this less than a year, and it's not easy to start from scratch to get opportunities to narrate. So yours was the third one that I've done. The first one was it was just a how-to book for a new Samsung phone. So yeah, it was relatively short, probably less than an hour, I think, narrating this user's guide for the Samsung book. Then the next one I got into, it was quite a bit longer. It was more than 11 hours.
Yeah.
It was called Strangers with Memories, and then it had a subtitle underneath it. But it was basically about the relationship between the United States and Canada between 1990 and 2010. So going through that time period when NAFTA was put together, when the September 11th terrorist attacks came to the U.S., and all the relationships that came about. The gentleman who wrote it worked in he was Canadian, but he worked for the United States Embassy in Canada. So he had kind of a unique perspective on what were some of these political relationships between the United States and Canada. So I would say anyone who is interested in knowing a little bit more about the relationship between the United States and Canada, particularly during that time period, it's a really good book for them. It's a history book as much as anything else. And so yeah, it was a straight nonfiction book. There were no voices, no characters in it. It was very, very straight. So yours was definitely a little bit more fun to do with more of a performance. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I had a listen to the other book you narrated, the non-fiction one. A great title, by the way. So kudos to the author for that title. And yeah, it sounds really. It's a different. I mean, it's your voice, obviously, so I was used to it a bit. But it's a different kind of tone for non-fiction. So it's interesting to see how someone can narrate both fiction and non-fiction, and it sounds kind of different, totally different in a way. It's weird to say that, but it's just, yeah, you kind of enter a different story, because even with non-fiction, it's still a story.
Yeah, so, yeah.
You say you haven't been narrating books for a long time, but honestly, you wouldn't know. Like, I don't know. I'm just really happy with how you narrated my book. So I'm looking forward to what other books you're going to narrate. And if any authors are watching this and they're interested in having audiobooks created, I highly recommend Aaron Adams. Like, I'm just extremely pleased. And just talking about this, I wanted to ask you what advice you have for people who want to get into doing narration, or they have been doing it for a while, and also for authors who want to produce an audiobook. What advice would you give them before they approach a narrator and during the working with a narrator? Like, was there something I should have done better while approaching you? Any details I should have been less details or more details you wanted about the book? Just tell us a little bit about this so we can improve our craft as well.
Well, I think for someone who's interested in being a narrator, I would suggest that you just get some audiobooks that are done by some of the best narrators and listen to them carefully, not so much from the standpoint of let me hear the story, but how are they doing it? What is their pace? How are they doing different voices? How do they transition from male to female? Because if it's one narrator and it's a nonfiction where you've got male and female voices, how are you doing that? Ask yourself, what are you really capable of doing at this point in time? excuse me, can you really do different accents? Okay. Unless you're really good at it, start out saying, no, I don't do different accents, unless you've got some experience with that. And then I would suggest going on to ACX, ACX.com. They've got some tutorials there about how to get started. And I think that's a great way to do it. And that would be my suggestion. It really doesn't cost a whole lot of money to get started, just to get the equipment that you can do in your own home. If you have a room that you can use, that's kind of set aside and is kind of quiet, and you can turn off the heater and the air conditioner in there. You can get all the equipment probably for certainly for less than $1,000, probably less than $700 US for that. But you want to get a good microphone and headphones and some things like that. For the authors, I think you just want to get have somebody that first of all reads the story. I would think it's helpful if they like the story. With the not so much the user's manual that I did, but the two stories, the two books that I've done, I genuinely like that. Even the one with the Strangers with Memories was not, it was not one of these stories that kept you on edge, wondering what's going to happen next. But it was history, and I kind of like that. And I said, oh, I didn't really realize this is what was going on behind the scenes, and that made it interesting to me. And I was able to hopefully make it interesting to the listeners. And of course, with Whispers and Other Strange Stories, every single one of them were interesting to me. When I first read through it, it was kind of like, okay, what's going to happen next? How is this going to end up? And I liked the fact that, at least in the written form, it's just in a few pages I could find out. I didn't have to wait a long period of time. So from the narrator's, from the writer's point of view, I would say, just choose a narrator that you think, when you have the initial conversations with it, you'll be able to work with, that you feel comfortable with, that you think will do a good job. It's not like you're in the same room where you can give, you can go back and forth with, oh, I think you did this well, I think you need to do this differently, and so forth. Because as you and I know, I would do a section, you would listen to it, and then maybe it'd be a day later, I would get the feedback, and I had done, a whole section there, and then I would try to incorporate that into the other things. So I think you got to have a little bit of confidence in the narrator to do it. That the author, their job is to write a good book. Then the narrator's job is to interpret it as they would interpret and interpret it, and through the voice. I think every author has something that they're listening to in their heads. Okay, this is what it should sound like, but the narrator may be listening to it and get a little bit of a different take on it.
Yeah, definitely. And because obviously, because you're in America and I'm in the UK, so obviously there's a couple of hours difference there. So
yes.
It would have been very difficult if I sent you lots of feedback, but also like, oh, you have to change this. I don't like how you said that specific word. You have to change it for every story. That would have been really annoying, I guess, for a narrator to do that. And time consuming. But yeah. I don't know, I think that's why I'm very pleased with you. I didn't even have to do that, because obviously if I had a narrator who wasn't putting the right accent on the word or the right emphasis on a certain word, because you as you said, it was clear from the writing where you had to accentuate a few things, things like that. So yeah, it's just like, I'm really pleased with that. I didn't have like headaches trying to explain, because with the other couple of auditions, other people were sounding robotic, and that's the least I wanted. You have such a sensibility. You just understand the text, and it's just like I was listening to my own stories, and I knew what was coming because I wrote them obviously, but I was still like surprised and excited to hear them. So it's just like, yeah, I think you can tell I'm really happy.
Well, I'm glad you are. I'm glad you are. I'm happy too. And I think, I think both of us probably feel if the listeners enjoy it and they say, hey, this was fun, I enjoyed it, then that's what's really going to make me happy. I've looked at some of the reviews, and and people said, hey, this was fun to listen to. I enjoyed it. And that makes me feel good. I mean, because to me, it's kind of like I'm doing a performance, but it's a performance where you don't have people clapping at the end of it or laughing. You don't get any immediate feedback at all. Okay. And then it's months, before you get the feedback. So it's when you do get the feedback, it's nice if there's some positive feedback. Hopefully people are enjoying it.
I was wondering if you had a look at the reviews, because many of them they mention, especially on Audible, not so much on Amazon, because the Amazon has the print reviews as well, but especially on Audible, they have to rate the performance of the narrator as well as the story and everything. And then most of them, they say it was a very suitable narrator, did the voices very well, which is like scary and spooky narration. So
Yeah.
you mentioned time there. I just want to briefly say, because I put the book for audition in July, on 2nd of July, and then I looked for it, but obviously I was also doing other things, working, and I didn't have time. I wasn't constantly looking for narrators. But I think on the 26th of July, we decided to work together. So yeah, it was a couple of 2 weeks until I found you, and then we decided to work together because you went on holiday and I was away as well, so it was a bit. And it took only until the middle of September, 16th of September, the book was published. So you were finished with it at the beginning of September, and then just 2 weeks it took ACX to approve it and to send it to Amazon and Audible and iTunes. So it wasn't a long time. Obviously, it's not a long book either, but it was also the timing because we were in holiday, so you weren't constantly working on it. I think it would take you even less time if you were just working on it every day. But you also have to rest your voice. There was someone on Twitter asked me, because I said I will have an interview with my narrator, ask me any questions, and there was someone asking how many times do you have to read the text before you record it, or how many times do you record it until you're happy with it? Because he was saying even poems he has to read, and it's just he reads several times until he gets the right feel of it.
Right. Well, I read the whole thing through from start to finish, just as somebody who's reading, okay, just to make sure that I knew everything. And so I did that. Then yours was with the different stories. Then what I would do is I would read a story, and as I'm reading, I would kind of mark it up on the paper, saying, okay, here's where I want to put an emphasis on this word. And and there was maybe a couple of words I wanted to make sure I had pronounced correctly. That I had to make some markings on. And so I read through it then, and that would be shortly before I would then do the narration of it. Now, fortunately, this is not like being in the theater or even say in a movie where you have to have the lines memorized. Obviously, I'm reading it as I'm going through it. And so that makes it a little bit easier. Reading through the whole thing from start to finish, and then read carefully through one chapter before I narrate that chapter. And what I would do, the chapters were generally short enough, I would do it from start to finish. Some of them I'd maybe get halfway through and I'd say, okay, well, I want to stop for a minute just to be able to move the pages around without that making a sound, or to go back through it again. And sometimes you make mistakes and they're mistakes that you make at that time, and so you just go back and immediately repeat that section, and then when you go back and edit it later on, then you cut out the bad part, leave in the good part, and that's the hard part of it for me.
I was going to ask you what's the least favorite of doing producing an audiobook. What's your least favorite during that time?
Yeah, by far it's the editing of it, because nobody's going to read through page after page after page without making a silly mistake, putting a word in here or skipping over something or saying something that was not really the way you wanted to say it. So most of it you realize at the time, and then you immediately go in and reread it, okay, and then just continue on. Then when you're listening back to it again, you will know, okay, hey, I did this twice, okay, the first one I didn't want, so I got to cut that out, and that's hard sometimes to be able to, on the computer, be able to get just the right stopping part and just the right starting point in there, so that it kind of meshes together and it doesn't sound like there was a section that was cut out, or it doesn't sound like there were two sections that were put together.
Yeah, I think it's the same for writers. Like the most annoying thing for us is the editing part. Although I do enjoy it more nowadays because I discover other things during the editing process. So it's quite, it's a different experience with editing, and it feels more creative when you're interpreting the text and all that. But it still has the fun. But yeah, I guess with audiobooks, it's a bit more.
Well, you have a little bit more freedom. You can write whatever you want, and nobody's going to say, "Oh, you can't write that." Whereas with the narration, you know, I need to be true to the text that was there. What you wrote is what I want to read. So it's not something where I can say, "Well, I would have said it a little bit differently." I'm not the author. I don't have that right to say it a little bit differently. I've got to read it exactly the way it was written there. So it's not a creative thing so much, it's a meticulous thing. Whereas I can see, you know, as an author, you've got some creativity, might be kind of fun with the editing process.
And I also wanted to say thank you for sending those bloopers while you were, I think those were a bit, I think they were quite fun.
Well, actually, some of the mistakes you make it 2 or 3 or 4 times. You read through something a couple of times, and each time, for some reason, it's not going the way you want, and you know, so that ends up, yeah.
Yeah, I think listeners or like readers, audiobook listeners, they don't realize that you actually have to like record and then edit. I think they for some weird reason they think, oh, you just read the book. And I was like, no, that's not what happens. You have to like stop, breathe, you know, read the line. If you mispronounce a word, you have to start from the beginning of the sentence, because otherwise it just doesn't give that emotion if you stop mid-sentence and you change it. And it's a lot of work. Like, it's not just reading a text, because I could read a text, but that's not the same experience. And yeah, I wanted to say thank you, because I've learned from listening to the audiobook. I've learned how to read better myself. I had like an audiobook, well, a book event on Sunday, and I feel I read better than at my first book event, just because I knew where to put the like want to pause and when. Although obviously I don't do such a good job as you, like you're the expert. So yeah.
Well, thank you. I would not pretend that I could write a book the way you do too. So that's what makes the world go around. Is we each have areas that we things that we do, and we do a little bit better than other people, and it's nice that we were able to collaborate and take what you enjoy doing, which was writing a wonderful story. Something I enjoy doing was reading it, performing it, and put it together.
Well, I can tell you now, when I'm writing, I'm always thinking, oh, what if Aaron narrates this? How am I going to write that character? Now I write with a voice in mind, and not just, oh, it's just a character. He has black hair, you know, long hands, and he's sad or whatever, you know, like weird things. And I think about the voices as well, and it totally changes the character. I feel it gives more body to it. It feels like more like a person than just someone on the page. So if you have anything you'd like to add, because I could stay here and ask you more questions, but I'm sure you have other things to do. So if there's anything I didn't ask and you think it would be good to mention, please do.
No, I just think if anyone has any thoughts or questions, they can feel free to direct them through you to get to me. Or I've got an email address, aaronadamsacx@gmail.com. Anyone can feel free to ask me questions there if they would like to. I'm on Facebook as well. That I just kind of set up fairly recently, so there's not a whole lot on there, to be honest with you. But if they have any questions, feel free. aaronadamsacx@gmail.com.
I'll make sure to put it on the screen. And
That'll be
I'll
great.
also add the audiobook sample at the end, just so people can have a listen.
Yeah, and I hope to have the opportunity to do some additional audiobook narration. If you have some books in the future, I would certainly enjoy auditioning for that. And if any of your listeners are writers, feel free to get in touch with me if they'd like to.
I'm sure you will, because you have a wonderful voice, and yeah, as I said, a great sensibility. You just understand the text without being given a lot of explanation or things like that. You just read it very well, as I had it in my mind.
Well, thank
So
you.
thank you so much. I hope I didn't keep you too long.
No, it's been my pleasure, Crina. I really enjoyed it. Thank you very much for writing such a great collection of stories. Thank you for asking me to narrate them. And thank you for the opportunity to be able to do this little interview today.
Thank you so much for narrating it so wonderfully. You make me blush now, so I don't know how to react. Thank you so much, and have a lovely afternoon.
Whispers and Other Strange Stories. Written by Crina-Ludmila Cristea. Narrated by Aaron Adams. I had been walking on my own for 3 days when I saw it. The creature stood perched on the cliff, stared at the moon, and then started howling. From that distance, I could only see its silhouette, but it was large enough to make me fear it. I checked to see if my knife was still in its place and checked my surroundings. I had to find a place to hide, but where? It was almost dusk, and I could tell the forest was getting thicker the more I advanced. I decided to set my tent at the base of a few large beech trees. I pondered whether to light a fire or not. I was afraid the animal was going to be attracted to it and come in my direction. I decided against it. I thought about what I saw earlier. I was aware that a large population of wolves still lived in this country, so I had expected to see one in one of these hikings. To be honest with you, I actually wanted to see one close. It was exhilarating to see an animal like this in the wild, but I had not expected it to be this large. I was slightly worried, but happy I had some weapons to protect myself with. I presumed I should be fine in my tent and fell asleep. I woke up early in the morning. The grass was covered with a thick dew and the earth smelled fresh, alive. I stretched, made myself some simple food, couscous with dried vegetables and chilies, to keep me going. I cleaned after myself and gathered my tent. I carried on walking. I had to find her. I expected to be near the property by now. For all I knew, I might have actually been inside it by then. I hadn't seen a sign or whatever, but I knew the forest was part of the land she owned. It was a massive property. Several hectares of wild landscape surrounded me. I saw several squirrels and rabbits on my way here, but now I was deeper into the forest. I expected to see deer soon. Just as I thought about the wonderful form of these animals, the smell of fresh blood hit my nostrils, and there, a few meters ahead of me, laying on the forest ground, was a large stag, or at least what was left of it. I looked around me, but there was no sign of the killer. It was probably gone by now. The poor animal had been mostly ripped apart, viciously consumed. There was blood spattered on a few stinging nettles and other wild plants around where it had found its ending. I said a silent prayer and continued my walk, more aware of my surroundings and quite shaken by the bloody sight. I had seen dead animals before, but this was something else. I could barely shake the remains of the stag from my mind when I stumbled upon an even more horrifying sight. The head of a wolf, torn from its body, just at my feet, hidden by the wild plants. I almost stepped on it. I shrieked in revulsion when I saw the bloodied fangs, but breathed in relief when I realized the animal was dead and couldn't harm me. But then the sudden realization hit me. Who had killed the wolf? What other creatures lurked in this forest? Was I in danger? More danger than I had anticipated? Well, that was still to be decided, but I was obviously in a little bit over my head by now. I started to regret the decision to come over here to this foreign place to do my research. The ladies offered to host me, to give me a place to stay while I looked for the flower, for answers, had been kind though, and I couldn't refuse it. I was also intrigued by it, I have to admit. Why the letter? Why me?